Kimberly, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited for our conversation.
I am as well. It's great to be with you.
So good to be with you. And I watched your TEDx before our conversation today. And whenever I do that or I read someone's book, I feel like I know them even before I meet them, which is such a strange thing, but it's actually a gift. And for those that maybe don't know your background, can you share just a little bit more about your background?
Sure. In a nutshell, I would frame my life as being really deeply connected to source and self, and that all the unfoldings of my life are an adventure in discovering myself and discovering that, what I would call an eternal source. And with that, as an adult, it's taken many different shapes and forms. I was plunged into a fiery experience of the divine. Back then, I used to use the word God, which is a beautiful word, but I don't use it as much right now. And after 5 years of a lot of ecstasy and bliss and healing and transformation, I joined a monastery and was living a monastic life as a Carmelite nun for 10 and a half years, where I was given the opportunity to go even deeper and wider in the understanding and exploration of this life that we are living. And then since then, which is coming on, I can't believe it's coming on 24 years, I am seminary trained. I have my master's in psycho-spiritual development, and I have been traveling and leading retreats, giving keynote talks, writing books. And now I do a number of online offerings as well. So very simple, but a lot of different forms. And my language and my formation continues to offer me the opportunity to hear what's truly stirring on the soul level for people and to be at service of that for them.
So good. When you said that you used to use the word God and you have started to use other words, tell me more about that. What prompted that?
I love that. Thank you. That's such a great question. So, my experience of God, of that word, is 100% beloved. That's my experience from when I was little. That's my framework. That's my positioning or my relational way of referring to that. And what I have found in my own service and ministry is that most of the people I serve are walking away from the way the word God doesn't serve them,
Hmm.
for opening up to this divine source and to themselves. And so, out of respect for the limitations that word has in our culture, I use the word less because I like to use language that evokes an experience for others of opening and not closing.
Mhm. And was your background then in a Judeo-Christian background originally? Is that how you came to know Source and the divine?
Totally. I grew up Catholic. I feel that I grew up in a very blessed environment in Ohio. My mom and dad were part of a charismatic renewal, which means the church was really on fire with gifts of spirit, and it was within a sacramental system, which I naturally found affinity with. Sacraments are a way of opening up to the mystery of life. So it fit my temperament and my personality. But with that was the formation and the theology that was very much a God oriented theology.
That's so interesting. Where in Ohio? Because I'm in Cleveland.
Oh, you are? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Cincinnati, opposite end.
Oh. I went to Miami University down in Oxford, so real close to Cincinnati. And then my youngest went to school at University of Cincinnati. So
Wow.
yeah, so very familiar with the city there. Interesting.
Love that. Love that.
So tell me about the Carmelite order, because I didn't grow up Catholic, so I'm not so familiar with some of these monastic terms.
It's so true. And if you're listening to this, I'm no longer any denomination. I'm no longer Catholic. I can't give my yes to the creed. But within that, monastic life is such a rich resource within the Christian tradition. Just like we hear of Buddhist monasteries and Sufi communities,
Mhm.
all of these traditions have sects within them, sects, that are concentrated on the experience of the mystical or the divine or the eternal. And monastic life in the Carmelite order was started in the 1200s, and it's fascinating.
Wow.
There was this small group of crusaders who were from England who went over to the Holy Lands with swords and shields and were intent on killing people to get the Holy Land back. And so this is an example of how much grace is always working. They go into the caves of Mount Carmel, where we have the historic or legendary accounts of Elijah experiencing God toward the ends of his life. And in these caves on Mount Carmel, they had an instant illumination. And they dropped their swords and shields and they realized the inanity of what they were doing. And they decided to stay there in those caves and become hermits living in community. So the whole order is founded under that premise that God's presence is in everything and that we're
Mm.
called to live in that presence and to be that presence. So the Carmelite order is founded for that reason, to provide an environment where we can encounter the unknown, if you will.
Thank you for the background. I had no idea, and it's fascinating. So, remind me, how long did you stay in the monastic order, did you say?
10.5 years.
And during that time, you decided at some point to leave. So, tell me what was stirring or what was happening in you that you knew that you wanted to leave.
Sure. And by the way, it will be even better expressed in my next book that's coming out. So if I give you a little snapshot right now and you're
Give
listening,
us a little snapshot. I definitely want to talk about your current book too, but I'm just fascinated by your story.
no, it's true. So in all truth, when I give that answer, a lot of times people aren't satisfied. My life from my earliest years has so much been about just the beloved,
Hmm.
faithfulness to that relationship. And when I took vows, I did not look back. I was so happy to be Carmelite. I can't even tell you. It was my greatest joy. As much as I was sad to not be in the lives of my family, the daily life, it was so much at the heart of why I'm here and who I am. So I never looked back. And I didn't actually have stirrings about leaving. So it wasn't a cognitive process and it wasn't a presencing of dissatisfaction. And both of those can oftentimes be signs that Spirit is leading us to a new step. So I'm not discounting that as a way Spirit works. What happened for me was instant illumination.
Mm.
And I didn't know what that illumination meant. I was building, you saw in the TEDx talk, I built a massive monastery, was the spearheader for it, and I was a young woman. I had no idea in that process that things were changing within me that was priming me for a next step that was dramatic. And that next step was leaving. I had no idea, no idea
Wow.
that was going to happen. And when that illumination happened, everything changed for me. The way I was looking at the world, the way I felt about my place in the world. And I was in what we oftentimes experience as a very, we know everything in us is changing. So we have a certain stability, but we also have the instability of not really knowing where we belong.
Yeah.
All
Wow.
that in our lives at these moments. It was like Elijah experiencing the whisper of God in the cave and being so certain, but not knowing what that whisper meant. And so, through a little bit of time, about 5 months later, it revealed itself to me. And it happened in a very dramatic way through a hawk and an inspired text. And I realized that my next step with the beloved was to leave. So there wasn't a departure the way I saw it, even
Mhm.
and to make it really black and white. Oh, you were a nun and now you're not a nun.
Yeah.
Because we're so wounded around these ideas of religion. And so they see it as black and white. And I'm like, but it really wasn't like that. What it was like is my beloved and I were holding hands, and we knew the next step was getting on this boat to cross an ocean. So it wasn't a departure from the essential call, even
Yeah.
though it was a change of the external environment.
Oh my God, it's fascinating. So tell us a little bit more about the TEDx and talk about the book, I think, that also Miracles in the Naked Light. Was that during your time while you were still in the monastery, when you were still in the monastic order?
My building the monastery?
Yeah.
Yes. Shaved head, full habit building this monastery. The illumination happened when I was, I think, 29. I took solemn vows. Those are vows for life in North Dakota. And the second book that just came out, Miracles in the Naked Light, you can all see a picture. And it's on Audible as well. They recorded it in studio with my voice, which I think that's awesome when the author reads their own.
Yes, I agree. I love that. It's just such a deeper connection. And especially for those listening that are going to listen to the book maybe after this, it just continues that thread of them hearing directly from you.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I moved from my mother monastery to a community that came from North Dakota to start a new monastery in Texas. And they had been around for 6 years. And they were really small. It was four nuns and they were older and they really needed some young blood. And I was newly professed. It happened in a very miraculous way, which I won't get into the long story of that. But the short story was it was clear I was meant to go. And so when I went, I had a lot of stirrings. I loved the variance of the lifestyle. It was very different. North Dakota was rich in ritual. It was well-established monastery. It was 20 nuns. The rituals were extensive and elaborate and all-consuming. And there was something that just took me into the womb of that experience. It was very powerful. Down in Texas, we were living in a converted house. We had a heavy workload. Monastic life takes a lot of inner working to make it run. And there were only five of us. So we had a mitigated lifestyle that I would say was more Zen like. Things were pared down very simply. And there was something about that I loved as well. And in that environment, one aspect that was a little hard for me was that in this converted house, it was very small and the doorbell rang a lot because we were so loved by the community. And the architecture wasn't in place that allowed there to be a separation of all the sound. So being in the throes of my vows and in this deep bliss, I just wanted silence. So what was great is the building of the monastery happened as an answer of the beloved to me personally for my longing for silence. And I think that's such a great example that even our places in our lives where we're dissatisfied, there's the niggling of spirit happening. It may not be in the thing in the way we understand it, but if we explore it a bit more, we'll find that even there, the seeds of our desires are the seeds of our happiness. And so that launched me into an unexpected role of being the general contractor. And I had no idea that was going to happen. And the second book is about that. So if you watch my TED Talk, you'll see that I just had a simple experience out in the wildflowers. No idea that the inner workings, it was like a little conspiracy, like of the heavenly realms. It's like, ha ha ha. Little did I know I was going to be integral and anchoring for the entire project and also discover within myself that I was capable of doing things I had no idea I could do. Or you can relate to that, right? Where you'll have an experience and you'll give a big yes to it, but you have no idea what you said yes to.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's faith, right? How long did it take for the monastery to get built?
Total miracle, 2.5 years. And that goes inception to the donation of 640 acres we were given within a couple months of that time of my wildflower experience on land that had nothing. We had no septic, we had no power. We did have a well that reached the main aquifer down so that we wouldn't suffer drought in Texas. And that's a miracle in and of itself. When I wrote the book, I began doing some research on the timeline, and there were lots of articles that came out because the project was so cherished in the area. And when I looked at the timeline, I was like, oh my gosh, I thought it was 3.5 years, which is a miracle. It was actually 2.5 years.
In the TEDx, you talk a lot about people coming together and just these blessings and miracles happening all around you. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that this was such a beloved project and people were so generous and willing to give and to share?
I think part of the essential nature of every human being, there lies a desire to be caught up in an outpouring of goodness,
Mm.
in an expression of goodness, to feel themselves part of a current of something that is manifesting love and beauty. I think over and again we see people come together in the face of beauty and tragedy to be instruments of goodness. And this in particular, because we were beloved as a religious community and the town was small, I think there was a way that it became a unique point of focus. I also think that's why it hit all the deep doubts and suspicions. Whenever something comes into form that's great, and if you look at the monastery, it's breathtaking. It's a holy shamoly. This was built with tons of volunteers, bigness to it. And I think when light shows up in a really big way, it shines a light not only on all that essential goodness at our core, but also on the places where there's woundedness to be healed. And so the monastery became a bit of a archetypal experience for all of that to come forward. That's what I think was. And there were probably a higher percentage of non-Catholics that participated as Catholics.
I love this idea of people recognizing that we're not separate and that we are pieces of the whole and wanting to come together under something that is beautiful and feels blessed. So, how amazing that you were able to be at the center of that experience. How did that experience change you?
I found what was happening in the experience first, and I say this in a really grounded way because with my experiences of the beloved, I was really undone. There was a working of within myself that was establishing me in wholeness. And in that, then I was a safe place to experience my gifts without losing myself in the identity of those gifts.
Mm.
And I was amazed that my mind and my heart and my inner resourcefulness was so strong. I was doing shop drawings. I was managing upwards of 17 crews a day. I was doing the long view and the short view of a major project with no architectural training, no general contractor training, no formal education around this. And I was doing it easily. I was in awe. It was like I was witnessing these things happening through me. Secondarily, I was discovering that the project itself was a dramatic channel of healing for many involved, not all, but many. So, just by saying yes to the project, people were experiencing very dramatic changes in their own lives, within themselves, internally and externally. And I got to presence that. And I found within myself also the love of presencing that, of witnessing that. And I think those two elements were working within me that contributed towards this next step that led me to leaving. Again, it wasn't a cognitive knowing because I wouldn't have thought of leaving, but it was an inner fidelity to my own evolution that set me up for an encounter that where I was no longer fit where I was.
It's interesting. It makes me think of the parable of the talents. And it feels like maybe you were given these talents in that moment, and you knew that in order to multiply, you couldn't stay where you were. You had to expand and go beyond maybe the confines of where you were, even though it served you for so much of your adult life. But who would have thought that coming from a monastic order to then being in charge of this huge project, as you said, with no experience doing these things, that you were able to do it and to do it so well, and then bring all these other people along with you in the process. Do you feel that was divinely orchestrated?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Again, I was more of a recipient, even though I was much of an agent of the project. I felt like I was a recipient at all times.
Mhm.
So, yes, I was witnessing day in and day out. It's another reason there were multiple motives to writing this book. and then the book that comes after that finishes the story. One of those reasons was because I'm the only memory keeper of all these amazing miracles. I'm the one who said yes to, and they deserve to be celebrated and recognized.
In your book, you do talk a lot about miracles. So, how do you define miracles?
I know, I love that. These questions, because they definitions change. So there's a mystic and theologian that I don't ascribe to all of his theology, but some of it resonates with me, and his name's Augustine from the early Christian tradition. And he said one time in his life, miracles are simply happenings in nature we have yet to understand. A way that I'm still very Catholic in my mysticism is that I believe every moment is a sacrament, every moment is a setup for the actuality and the potentiality of this eternal source, this beloved, this divinity to come into form. And miracles are that liminal space where we step into the unknown. We get to presence and participate in this consciousness coming into form. And we find, I think, as we grow in recognizing that every moment is a miracle, truly, not as a platitude, not as an affirmation we cling on to, but as we embody it more and more, we find that we're not surprised, but we are filled with wonder.
I love the word wonder too. I always think of little kids being in this like childlike wonder as they're experiencing the world. And
Yeah.
for us as adults to be able to do that again with fresh eyes is so amazing. I like that definition by Augustine. It's almost like simplifies a very complicated concept.
I'm glad you like it too, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that really
Yeah.
resonates.
The other thing you talk about is grace.
A work in progress for me, the notion of grace. In my introduction in this book, I mentioned that there were three foundational messages that are threaded within my experience. Obviously, when we read a book, we come to it as we are. So we're going to get the messages Spirit wants for us. So I'm not teaching something, but I am conveying my experience. And in my experience through the building the monastery and my life at that point was a continual discovery of how everything is grace. And for me, it's a very difficult concept to give words to. Grace is an attempt to articulate the vibrational agency of the uncreated, that there is an uncreated source that is coming into form. And that movement, that actual, which is subtle and audible, that movement itself is grace. Existence itself is grace because existence happens as a flowing forward from that which is uncreated. So it can't happen without a certain agency to it. Simultaneously, our participation in grace is the awakening to this reality. It's the awakening process. And grace is always happening, always. Now, I point out in my introduction that for me, that it's a tricky postulation to hold as true because it could lead to bypassing or repression or denial of the things that are hard in life. Real destruction and hurtfulness, betrayal, lying, deceitfulness, all sorts of things that happen, oppression. What do you make of that? How do you say everything is grace and come to terms with these things that are contrast? And what I've discovered is that the living into everything is grace doesn't separate us from this, but brings us more intimate in a wordless way. And when we come really intimate in a wordless way, we experience how everything is held, everything is touched. And I think what speaks to it, probably even better than me, is if you haven't seen it, the movie The Shack. In that movie, and in the book as well, but in the movie, you get a very mysterious encounter of a man who has lost his young daughter tragically,
Yeah.
come to terms with that suffering. And if you get really close to the experience of the Trinity that he's having in the persons of the three individuals, they don't give him easy answers. But in that, he keeps wrestling with it. And in the wrestling, he begins to experience the wisdom of it. And he can go through his own healing around it. I think that speaks to what I'm talking about when I am experiencing grace and when I postulate that everything is grace.
Yeah, it is a difficult concept, but yet when we experience it and feel it, it is so moving. And you know that it's real. It's just one of those things that it's hard to explain necessarily to someone unless you experience it yourself.
Yes, I agree. And how do we share in that? I think the storytelling. And I love the method, but that doesn't really touch us so deeply as the stories do, our
Right.
stories.
Yeah, our stories, because we forget that if you believe that they were real people. And it's so much more impactful to think these were real people before us that have experienced these stories and even sharing our own personal stories. One of the other concepts you talk about is this idea of pulsing consciousness. What is that?
Right. These are great. You pulled some really wonderful words. Love this. that you resonate in with some curiosity there. Yes. So, in my understanding, which falls in line with a school of tantric philosophy and theology coming from the 1200s, and in that is an understanding that consciousness is awareness, can be described as awareness, but it is pre creation. It is the allness that we can't comprehend because we're part of creation. But consciousness chooses of its own free and independent will to pour itself out upon the canvas of creation that is itself. So, pulsing consciousness to me is every creative element. And in that, I consider like a heartbeat. If you conceptualize or open up your imagination to wonder with childlikeness of every creative element, every aspect of creation is a heartbeat of an uncreated consciousness coming into form. Because the heartbeat is a bit like that, isn't that? We can't quite hold on to its origin, and yet it's very real. It's happening. And you can't have life without a certain heartbeat. And that heartbeat shows up in different ways. We have this physical heart that has the electromagnetic pulsing that's happening. But if you extrapolate that idea, there is a way that everything has that kind of a pulse into life that's happening with an origin we can't quite reduce in creative terms, in scientific terms, and we have become more and more descriptive of it as science grows and evolves. So that's how I would refer to it. It's the form expression of consciousness.
Yeah, it's almost like the breath, also, right? The heartbeat, the breath, those are two. I think of it, I do breath work, so I'm very tied to the breath as well as an experience of the life force within us that is with us always while we are here and in these physical bodies. But the breath was pre creation too. It came to us at the moment that we inhabited these bodies, our consciousness inhabited these bodies.
Yes, I love that. I agree. Really great.
Kimberly, I'm very curious for those that are listening. How did the TEDx come to be? And then how did you, or why did you decide to write your first book and now your second book?
Sure. These things are significant. And at the same time, for me, they've happened with such lightness. Almost, I think I'll go to that coffee shop today. Like, that's about
It was aligned action. That's why it
how
worked out the way it did.
somebody suggested me for the TEDx, somebody referred me. And in that, I received an invitation to audition. I didn't seek to audition, but I did need to audition. And when the invitation came, I felt that it was really of spirit. And I said yes, I auditioned and I was offered a spot. The book, I always knew that I would be writing. One of my main gifts is communication, is words. And I lead retreats and I give talks and I facilitate a lot of things. And while I can do hands on healing and I have a variety of various gifts, the biggest source of my being an instrument seems to be word. Sitting down to a book, and it came about effortlessly. In 2014, I wrote my first 600-page manuscript in less than 3 months because the timing was right. This manuscript was 860 pages, and my publisher generously, a few of them read it and reread it to help me know where to break the book and what to be in this book. And there's a very subtle knowing that it's time and also having the elements of my life line up. And if I may add to that, it doesn't always happen in ways that are consoling. So for my first book, my business was beautiful, strong, and robust. And it lined up that I had 4 international women's groups that were my sources of income, in addition to everything else I did. And what happened is my schedule opened up. And aside from those 4 groups, I didn't have to book anything else if I didn't want to. So, in a consoling way, the stars aligned to give me space to wake up in the morning. I wrote most all the book in this one coffee shop. I'd get there when they'd open, I'd be there when they closed. And every 3 or 4 hours, I'd buy something because I didn't want to take up the table without giving them something. So that is very consoling when that happens. This manuscript actually came about when my schedule was lightened up through loss. The lockdown changed my flow. I went from being booked out all throughout the country to having nothing. I was working with the homeless to help them during a time of great need during the lockdown. And the time came for me to leave that position. And I literally stepped into the unknown, having no idea about everything because I wasn't booked out anymore because the lockdown changed everything for my field and what I was doing. Many of the places that always booked me weren't booking anybody anymore. They disappeared or they changed. So I had to step into the unknown with this manuscript, not having the same stability as the first book. So I give that story because when things align for us to say yes to something in our lives, it doesn't always give us the kind of security we're looking for. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't.
That's so true. What were you doing before? What was it that your business was doing before lockdown?
I was traveling 8, 9 months out of the year. People would bring me in to offer either keynote talks or the inspired message at spirituality centers, leading a few retreats through the year. It was a quilt work. It had naturally emerged from when I started my company in 2006. But with my first book, I did a national book tour, and that resulted in me just being booked out because my reach just exponentially increased
Yeah.
and sought. So I had moved from seeking into being sought.
Mhm.
And that was solid. And then when the lockdown first happened, like many of us, people canceled, but they rebooked me because they're like, oh, this is going to last a month or 2 months.
Yeah, little did we know.
Totally.
Yeah. So your first book is called, I want to make sure people know, is Miracles in the Naked Light. And if people want to read this book, where is the best place that we can direct them?
Absolutely. So, The Miracles in the Naked Light is actually the second in a trilogy.
Oh,
But the best way is going to my website, kimberlybraun.com. I have actually 3 books out. The first book is Love Calls. That was my book tour in 2015. And then I published an interim book of poetry. So, Miracles in the Naked Light, that will give you the link through either to Amazon, where you can click through to Audible, or you can buy the online, the Kindle version, or you can buy the physical book. But you can also buy it from my publisher. There's all these different ways that you can choose to buy it. You can connect with me through my newsletter. You can attend a retreat. My website's the best way, kimberlybraun.com. And our podcast here will be on my website once it's published.
perfect. We will include all those links. And what is your next book, the third in the trilogy, called, and when will it be available?
I am still at the service of this message. Being at the service of this will go through 2025. And the next book, I would say 2026, early 2026.
Oh, that's wonderful. We definitely will include all the links so people can see how they could work with you, they could read your books and engage further. And I ask everyone a final question, which is tied to the title of the podcast. What does it mean to you to live the width of your life?
I've been thinking and reflecting on this. It is a falling into and an awakening into the fullness of our being as the divine. And it is a moment by moment active surrender into the unknown of who we are so that we can taste who we are. We become the embodiment. Our biggest call is to be the embodiment of this consciousness, to discover what it is. And it doesn't exclude who and what we are, it catches up our personality, catches up our mind, catches up our heart, catches up our stories, this time and all lifetimes. And to live that width is the greatest adventure that we could embark upon and the greatest gift we could give ourselves.
I love that response. Kimberly, thank you for being such a bright light in this world. Thank you for the amazing work that you are doing. And I'm just so grateful for our conversation today.
I am so grateful as well. Thank you so much for having me.